that? Hello. Hello, everybody. We're officially started, aren't we?
I think so.
This
I'm
is
just
now an
making make sure that
ASMR
it's not.
webinar.
Okay, good. It's muted. That means that we can get
Mm,
started
yeah,
for anyone.
yum, yum, yum. Um, Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next webinar from the Accountability Success Circle. I am your host, Gary Ware, and I'm joined by the ever so beautiful.
Is it other way?
Am I not pointing at you?
For me, he's pointing to you, so I just to be
Oh,
clear.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Am I pointing this way to you?
It's cool.
I
April
don't know.
Schlueter of the Cheerful Mind, and we are going to jump in and get started. Every month, we bring a topic that we are discussing inside of our amazing group, the Accountability Success Circle. So if you're watching this in the circle, hello. If you're outside the circle and watching this on YouTube, hello as well. And this is just a little sneak peek of what we got going on the inside. This month, our theme is on minimalism. And the reason why we came up with this is simply, because we've been quarantined for the last, I don't know, like 40, 50 days. We probably have accumulated a lot of stuff. Or because you've been home more than you normally do, you probably are looking around and like realizing, like, oh my gosh, I have a lot of stuff, either accumulating in your physical environment or in your mental environment or in your digital environment. And we wanted to discuss this and have a really cool conversation. And we brought, as you can see, where I'm at, he's right here. Um, he's like right underneath me, and I'm gonna give him like a little head massage. Uh, our guest, Anthony Ongaro, he is an audio visual creator, which means he creates things for video or an audio. I've heard him sing. He can sing like a freaking songbird. We're not going to put him on the spot and make him sing, but we will point to some links where you can hear him sing. It like literally like makes me almost
I've
want to
not
cry.
heard this stuff. Have
He's an
you been
amazing
editing this
singer.
for me?
And he creates amazing audio things. He can play the piano. He has like, I'm just gonna just geek out on Anthony real quick before we like invite him to talk. He has this device, which the name I forget what it's called, and he's like jamming on it. It's like steel drums, but not. And he's like creating like beautiful music. And he's like, oh, I'm just making this up on the spot. Like, I'm just like, because he's that musically inclined. And he also creates videos. He's a YouTuber. He has an amazing YouTube channel called Break the Twitch. I advise you all to go over there. And he has a community called Break the Twitch as well. And this is all about owning your attention and building better habits. He lives currently near Phoenix, Arizona, with his beautiful wife, Amy, and their dog, Rocky. So, welcome, Anthony.
Woohoo!
Like the intro, thank you. Really appreciate it. Glad to be here with you too.
I know it's
Yay!
been a hot minute. And so, yeah, we're talking about minimalism. So, we have a few topics that we want to address. And April, how about you kick it off since I've been talking for a hot
Yeah,
minute?
yeah, no, I like it when you talk more because usually then I'll say like, what else is there? And I think that you've covered most of it. And I think one of the things that we want to make sure that we tackle today is to really look at minimalism through the lens of somebody who is a high achiever, someone who wants to get a lot of stuff done, wants to accomplish goals. Because I think sometimes we think about, if you want to do all the things, minimalism doesn't seem to fit in that package. But what we're trying to convey is that there are aspects of just living with minimalism in mind that can actually help you be more productive, which is, all the stuff that I love to talk about. But we'll also talk about it from the aspect of space, because we were talking about clutter. But I think that there's also just this idea of when we went through this whole COVID pandemic thing, we realized that we were moving at such a fast pace and juggling a lot of different balls in the air. And when that was taken away from us, it was a really big transition to, you know, having to create a new normal. And as we start to go back into the world, we're going to really think about, we've had this long amount of time to kind of reset what has like what has been in our lives, because we've had to create the new normal. So as things slowly start to open up again, depending on where you're at, we're gonna, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but we're going to have this opportunity to transition kind of slowly, because there isn't a cure yet, and people are still going to be, we're not going to just go back into our old lives, right? So this is going to give us the opportunity to really take a look at what's really important and making sure that we set really, really good foundations. So I think sometimes in order to do that transition back, we have to kind of like bring things like to a little bit of a bigger picture, and then really start to renegotiate, and then slowly step back and dip our toes in the water. I can't talk today. So we've got Anthony to help us with this, and we are super excited. And we'll just start with, we'll just kind of get things started. So I would love for all of us to kind of like share our perspectives and definitions on minimalism. But Anthony, since you haven't had the chance to talk yet, I would love to hear about your journey. And because we've known you as somebody that's like in the minimalism space, but I know that you kind of call it more intentional living. And so I would love to hear more about just your journey through, because I know that there's been a lot of decluttering in your life, especially with your recent move. But how did this all come about? And I guess you can kind of share also about Break the Twitch, because that's a lot of that story.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks again for having me. And it is a really interesting time, isn't it, right now? We've gone through something as a world, really, together, which is very, very unique. And everyone just about had to pump the brakes and figure out what is going on. And in a way, it's a huge, huge reset. And it's a very unique opportunity. You said, we hope it's a good thing to slowly kind of get the wheels turning again. But I think it really is a good thing as much as it can be, right? There are obviously difficulties that come with the situation, job loss, financial strain that can come from the results of it. But one way or the other, it is a forced pause button. And we have to kind of look at that and go, all right, well, here we are. And we now have this opportunity to take what has been scaled down and slowed down and rebuild it in a different way. Seth Godin talks about like the points of transition and change and upheaval being the best time to reach a new audience, and very much in the inverse. I think it's the best time to change your life, to change your habits, to reconfigure your foundation, because you are more open to it during these times. So that, just to start, I think it can be seen as a great opportunity right now to rebuild in a different way, in a way that maybe wasn't super satisfying right away, or if there was something missing. And I think minimalism is an amazing way to approach that. It's a great framework to do that. So my own journey through this has been essentially one that has been just rolling and rambling through the last 6-7 years. I've always been interested in this idea of intentional living, this idea of what does it mean to live well, to hone your focus. Focus is something that has never come naturally to me. I had a lot of different interests, and school and like that form of learning was never really my strong suit per se. And so I've always been interested in exploring the self-help section, even as a young person, to discover what it takes to build yourself up, to improve, to learn and grow. And so to a very strong extent, I would say that my minimalism path and understanding this side of things started with that foundation and that general interest. But it really accelerated when I met Joshua Becker, who really opened up this world of the idea of less but better, the idea of removing distractions, and at least through starting at that point, physical minimalism, stopping with the constant flow of stuff. For me, it was Amazon, a lot of one-click purchases, which is what led to the concept of Twitch. It's just a single little Twitch that removes money from your bank account, adds another thing to your house. Your space just clutters up stuff. Might get used, might not, but it's just this little decision that lacks intention a lot of the time. It can happen so quickly without even really thinking about it. So that was the foundational element of when I started exploring Break the Twitch and this concept and writing about it, and breaking into a bit of amateur behavioral psychology, I suppose, trying to figure out what all of that was. And the process started for me playing the MINS game, where you get rid of one thing on the first day of the month, two things on the second day, three on the third. And by the end of a 30-day month, you're decluttering like 500 things from your house. We did that a couple times. My wife, Amy, joined me for it. And we started seeing a lot of benefit just in having less stuff around, having more space. And that evolved into so much of this foundational element of life that things just got better and better. We got more and more flexible. We were just able to pivot more quickly. We were able to adjust in life when things came up. And we continue down that journey through looking at what we can do positively with that space that we created. And now really how minimalism helps us actually own our attention, which in turn allows us to own our future and where we're headed. So that's been a bit of the high level journey. Obviously that's a very condensed version, but that's how we really came into understanding this is such a beneficial thing.
That's awesome.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for taking us on your journey, Anthony. And one of the reasons why, like when I first heard about Anthony's story, and I'm like, yes, I totally relate, is that whole concept of, the Twitch, of you think you're being intentional. And again, if you think about how applications are created and things like that, like they want to make things easy for us, but what they didn't realize is that they're conditioning us. And when I first heard about your concept of Break the Twitch, maybe it was a coincidence or maybe not. It was all about when I heard about our behavior, in that anything that we do, like from like opening our phone and then, going to Facebook, or like you said, you see something and then you one click buy. We think we have a conscious control over that, but there was a study where they had the EKG machines on our head, and they were measuring our brain waves and our actions. And there was a like a microsecond brain sort of energy bolt before someone actually did a conscious decision. And that was like, that's the Twitch. And they thought they had a conscious control, like, oh, I'm going to buy this. But comes to find out, the brain was like, no, you're going to do this. And then you justified, oh, I'm going to do this. And they were looking at people that had addiction issues, especially digital addiction issues. And they found that a lot of it was outside of people's control. And so I love how you recognize that. And by recognizing it, it brings it to your awareness. And then you took steps to change that. And it also, like, I love your definition of like what minimalism is, because if you look on the surface, like you think minimalism, you think of like the whole Marie Kondo, like had a, like live with nothing, like how they talked about how Steve Jobs in his mansion only had like a chair. To be honest, when I first thought about minimalism, I was like, I don't know. I like things, but you had talked about, and that's why, like, I love how you're connecting this with intentional living. And this is from your amazing book that everyone should buy, called Break the Twitch: A Practical Guide to Minimalism, Intentional Living, and Doing More of What Matters. And so you said minimalism is the intentional promotion of the things we most value and the removal of everything that distracts us from that. And I'd love to have you just go into detail about that.
Yeah, definitely. It is pretty intimidating, isn't it, to see an image that has a single chair in the corner and it's like #minimalism, or all these pictures that are in black and white and don't have, just are super isolated, and it's like a spoon on a table, and #minimalism. And there's this perspective, and I think there's a beautiful artistic aesthetic. And there's this whole idea of the Scandinavian design ideal that is this minimalist, very clean lines that is now very strongly associated with minimalism, especially on YouTube, because it is minimalist design. But when the biggest thing is like, well, am I going to have to get rid of my books to be a minimalist? Like, are you going to take my books? And it's like, no, this is not, to me, that's not a practical, realistic, or helpful version of minimalism. You can have 1,000 books and be a minimalist. You can have a collection of things and be a minimalist. It's really more so about this framework, this idea of using it to make choices about your life. It's just, that's all it is. And so it's much less intimidating when you start thinking about, what are my priorities? What are the things that I value? What are the things that would allow me to access those things more readily? So putting those things front and center, either physically, mentally, or otherwise. And then looking around and going, all right, what's distracting me from those things without real value? Sometimes distractions can have value as well. But if it does, then to me, it's not really a distraction. And then looking at those things and removing some of those things, physically, mentally, or otherwise. A lot of letting go has to do with letting go of something that we're holding on to, which ends up being a physical manifestation of that thing. Or the reason we keep that app on our phone, even though we don't use it, is because like MyFitnessPal is I'm gonna get back in there. You know, it's just like we have these things that we hold on to, and most often, if we're able to let go and be who we are now, and just like go through the painful process of kind of assessing that sometimes and like really facing that, it's incredibly powerful, and we can really step into who we are now, who we will be going forward, and it's a big change. And so it's a framework, it's a mindset, and it really is just a tool. It's like a hammer, right? Minimalism can be dumb. You can build dumb things with it, or you can build cool stuff, or you can, you know, whack someone with it. It's just a tool, and it's not something we need to achieve. We never need to achieve the status of a hammer. It's like, it just is, right?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
It's crazy. And I think, you know, when it comes to, so I think a lot of times people will say, you know, when they think of minimalism, it's like, you know, how do we get rid of our stuff? And that's because it's the most visible, tangible thing. But obviously we know that it's more than just clutter. And I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely been like twitching on like buying stuff on Amazon since this whole COVID thing. I was like, you know what? When we get to go outside again, I want to do like driveway social distanced like Friday cocktails at each other, like on each other's driveways. And I was like, I'm gonna buy a nice purple chair.
Yeah.
It has all these pockets. I bought two, so they're still sitting in boxes outside of my office right now. And I'm like, why did I buy those? But they will come in handy, and I know that for sure. But I think there's a lot more than just the things, right? I mean, trying to declutter, there's the distractions that are in your mind. So let's just get a little vulnerable here for a second and just talk about currently. And I know that all three of us have kind of had our own version of, you know, trying to be more minimalistic, especially this month with the theme. But what would you say is your biggest struggle, just so that people who are watching this can can either connect to or relate to, or, you know, think about what they've got in their lives that they're just kind of struggling with, either too much complexity, too much clutter, too much distraction. And this could be, you know, either physically, mentally, or whatever. So Gary, you go first.
Yeah. So for me, I don't really have a lot of things because as of this recording on, was it May 20th, 2020, me and my family, we are sheltering with my my wife's family. So my mother-in-law and stepfather-in-law. And we've been here since April, I guess. So we've been here for a hot minute. And we don't really have a lot of things. Like, we just packed up a few things. Matter of fact, like, just have a few outfits. I'm going the Anthony route, and all of my shirts are black. And I only have 7 shirts. So like, depending on what you see, like, I, you know, will either be wearing this. I don't know where it is on my shirt, but this shirt or 6 other variations. Only have like as far as clothing, very minimal. And as far as like things that we brought, very minimal. I have like 2 books, and I'm almost finished with them, so I can like disregard. But for me, My sort of collection comes in the digital space, especially like on my phone. Like I'll be doing something like, oh, this would be cool. Like, and I'll, apps a lot of times are free. And then like I like will play around with an app, and then I am the statistic where they say like most apps are only open like once. I don't know the exact statistics. So that's like me. And so that's one of the things that I tend to have a clutter of like, oh yeah, that. And anything in the digital space, like I'm just like, ooh, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like, digital books. I have lots of digital books. I've got lots of audiobooks. And I've been trying to be more intentional with it, because a lot of times because I love how you mentioned, Anthony, like it has to do something with our identity. Like for me, I'm like, oh, that will be a good reference. I'm gonna get this book because it means something. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I can get some sound bites from it. And so I definitely putting more sort of roadblocks to reduce that. I'll just put it in a list. On Amazon. Like I'll put it in a wish list that's just personal to me, and then I'll give myself some space, and then I'll come back and like, do I still need this, or have we cooled off? So yeah, that's me. What about you, April?
I feel like when I was talking at the very beginning about like, okay, so your life is running like 50,000 miles an hour, and then COVID happens, and then all of a sudden it's like you have wide open spaces. That was definitely me, but it was also trying to navigate not only my schedule, but my kids' schedule, understanding that my husband is here and he's probably going to be working from home for the next year. So it's like a very much a new normal. And, for me, typically, like, I work from home, everything at home is nice, but there's just a lot of now having to deal with three other bodies other than me that are creating clutter trails and garbage that needs to be cleaned up. So part of it is, teaching them to clean up after themselves instead of trying to do it all. But I think, one of the big things that I have always struggled with, and I have been very vocal about this because it's been such a thorn in my side, and now I'm taking all of this time to get my life and my act together, is that I'm one of those people who runs 50 miles an hour. When I think of an idea, I start taking action on it. I don't completely finish it, but I know that because I've started it, I have to finish it because I finish everything I start. But then there's two other things that I decide to start and then not finish. And then, oh, here's another two other things. So I think my big issue is that, like, I am like an idea person, and I come up with these amazing ideas, and then I want to do them, and I will create lists, but then the lists keep on building, and the tasks keep on, opening and, growing. And so one of my biggest struggles has been to kind of herd my brain into saying, like, that's a great idea, which I will do if I remember it, like, and trying not to put things on lists, because if I can't do it in that moment, like, it's not something that I can do. But if I put it on a list, then it's just going to create overwhelm. So my big non-minimalism issue is in, my to-do list, my calendar, and I'm slowly cleaning through all those things. So email has been a huge problem for me for at least 4 years, that now I'm down to something respectable and a plan to, clean that up. And I've got all these other things that I've been thinking about this month, because we've had this theme of minimalism. Is like, what do I have too much of? Like, I tend to, when I don't like some hair product, I buy new hair product, and if I don't like that, then I buy other types of hair product. Then I have like 6 different kinds of hair product, and I don't want to get rid of any of them because I don't want to waste them. But really, does that make any sense? So I'm trying to deal with some of that, but also thinking about, how do I stick to something and make a commitment to something, and then wait until, instead of jumping the gun and trying to, get something else to take that place, like, really just give anything that I, buy or commit to, like, its chance to prove me wrong, or, whatnot, and just giving it the attention that it needs, because I spent the money on it, and so I don't go into that waste and then having excess. So I got lots of minimalism issues, but generally we don't, we have a very good system of, when we buy new things, and we get rid of other stuff. So, we try not to keep too many books around, and we put stuff in storage, or, donate them. And so we've got that at least handled. So, but Yeah, always lots of issues. Anthony, your turn.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, a good chunk of that resonates with me actually, just because it's of what both of you said. Because one, I can tag on to what Gary was saying about the digital side of things. In terms of, I'm a very like out of sight, out of mind brain, and so digital spaces are hard for me. Like the hardest thing I struggle with personally is file organization. Just I do a lot of video work and filmmaking work for clients and otherwise, and it's really important to have just all that stuff in like, here's the footage, here's the audio, here's the script, here's the project, and like having it accessible so that a year later when they call you and go, oh, like we want to use that footage for this other thing, you have it there. And that's still, even just for everything I do, making YouTube videos and all this other stuff, the digital space, it's just so important. And it's so hard for me because it's like you download something and like, well, I'll just put it on my desktop really quick. And then you have, you're like, oh, there's a lot of stuff on my desktop. So you put that in a folder and then it builds up again and you put all of that in a folder. And soon you have Inception with 4 levels of desktop folders.
Yes.
And so a lot of this, like,
is very sad right now.
Oh, I mean, it's the reality of like inboxes and desktops and things like that. And just to hit on this really quick, like I've just said that I struggle with this, but fundamentally, like this is what minimalism helps with and is about. That if you can apply it to this, essentially, it's like it's being able to have the space to take the extra moment to put the thing and just go to a different file path and put it where, or it's having that extra time above what you need to do to have that chunk that is dedicated to figuring out the file system in the first place. Yeah. It's like, this is being productive, this is figuring out how to be productive. Yes. Or like, this is learning, and this is learning how to learn better. That's the kind of stuff that the space around physical minimalism, around mental minimalism, conceptually as a framework, that's like one of the core benefits of it that I've seen in so many different areas with like time and other stuff. But it's like a daily battle to be like, nope, I'm gonna put that screenshot in this folder. Got to do it. Yep. And so that's a big one. And then the to-do list item things. It's funny, April, because I come from a totally the opposite side of that problem, where for a lot of my life, like I talked about school and other things, deadlines, I struggled with finishing the things I started. Like I'm an idea person. I love ideas and I come up with a lot of them, and I get excited about them, and I can really like energize people and stuff around a cool idea. And I'm very quick to start. Like I'll start stuff immediately. Like cool idea. Oh yeah, like let's build out like the outline, and I can have a domain registered in 30 minutes. And so my work has been like having to like go, oh, that's an interesting idea, but my plate's already full. And
yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm struggling with now too. I mean, but I think before it was like, okay, I'll just finish. But like, yeah, all those online courses that I was like, oh yeah, I want to take that online course. And then, oh crap, when there's no deadlines to anything, it just becomes this thing like, oh yeah, that's my issue with books. And like, yeah, this is a great idea to buy this book. But then if I can't finish it, it just becomes this like list. So yeah, trying to stop yourself from taking action on your ideas is like some of the hardest things to do. And then not putting it on a list anywhere, because if it is really important, it will get done eventually, because you just won't be able to control yourself, right?
Maybe. Or like me, in 2011, you put it in your Moleskine notebook as like this big old thing, and you turn the page and you find it 7 years later when you're going back through your old notebooks, like, it's funny, these New Year's resolutions seem to have a lot of repetition in them. And that was the thing, like with this, what this brought on for me is realizing that I have tons of ideas. I can do a lot of things, but I can't do them all at once well. Yeah. And in order for me to follow through consistently and build up what it has taken to get where I am now and continue is like, I have to do less, but better, right? I have to do fewer things. And that's a hard thing to grasp when you have a lot of interests and a lot of things are exciting. It's a lot to take on. But the visualization is this, and I know we're not breaking down tools yet, but I want to throw it in just because it's so relevant. And I've been thinking about this. have to think about things like little tiny, like a VW Beetle, but like a clown car. Everything, right, looks small. You're like, that's totally manageable. Start a podcast, you just record yourself, right? And then upload it. Everything is a clown car. It looks small. You're like, oh, it's just one thing on a to-do list. But then as soon as the doors open, 18 dudes pop out of that thing and there's chaos. And so we have to like embrace this visualization of it's not just a thing. It is a project. And projects have deadlines, they have expanded terms and needs, and they have other things that you'll need, and then you'll need to figure out other things. And it's not a reason to not do things. It's just a reason to consider what your current operational status is. And if you can handle what happens to be in that mysterious VW Beetle. So it's important to kind of like look at things that way instead of thinking of like, well, it's just a podcast. I made that mistake. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's never just a podcast.
You know what, you bring up, the whole thing about everything's a project. Reminds me of like our mutual friend Charlie Gelke's book. Was it Start Finishing? And when he had mentioned that, like in the book, I was like, you're right, everything's a project. And when you start breaking it down like that, you can't help but to realize that you have to unpack things. And on the surface, it seems like it's just a podcast, or we're just going to go live on the internet. But when you start to realize like what happens, and that has been a great thing for me of like not taking on too much, because before we went live, we were talking about the book Tiny Habits by researcher BJ Fogg from Stanford. And he has this thing called the Fogg behavior model. And so if you can imagine, so Fogg behavior model is behavior equals ability plus motivation plus prompt. That's all any sort of behavior is. So if you imagine a graph, the vertical part of the graph is the motivation and the horizontal is your ability. And imagine in the middle is like a curved line. And so for things that are hard to do, so low ability is on the far left, it takes more motivation before you can actually do it. And so if you want to make things just easier for you to do, or if you want to make behaviors more attractive and you do it over and over again, you just make it easier to do. If you want to reverse that, you make things hard to do, or you adjust the motivation. But motivation is like one of those things where it's, he talks about doing that last. But again, going back to projects, when it just seems like, it's just a podcast, it seems like the ability to do is easy because you don't think about all that goes into it. But if you put on the whole thing, everything's a project, it makes the ability seem harder, and then you're less likely to do it. So that's how I look at everything. It's like, podcast. And I immediately start thinking like, what are the steps? And then my thing is like, no, I probably don't want to do that. And so like, I just like sort of talk myself out of it. And that's my personal thing, because I'm like all of you of like, oh, that sounds exciting. Oh, that sounds exciting. Oh, that sounds exciting. And I find myself starting a whole bunch of stuff, and all of those ideas and projects become clutter. Mm-hmm. And then I'm overwhelmed and I'm not doing anything. And then if I look back on like a time period, it's like, oh yeah, this year I half started 16 projects,
a lot of half-built houses. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why a lot of the stuff is in the digital space. So it doesn't you don't realize it takes up a lot of space, but it does. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Anthony. I appreciate that.
Here's the thing that I think is really important to tack onto this is, even if you don't think that you're like a busy, productive person, even if you hold like this belief that you're lazy, or if you hold this belief that, you're like not that productive, even then this applies. Like inherently, most people overwhelmingly, and I can make an assumption that no one listening to this podcast is inherently lazy, like, or unmotivated. Like, especially during this time, you're dealing with 100 more things than you would normally be dealing with.
Yes.
And you already might be trying to go in too many different directions at once as it is. It's not a motivation problem. it's a space problem. Even like I said, even if it doesn't seem like things are that full, it's very, very interesting when you start looking into like how the dopamine stuff works and like the distractions and how certain things just expand to fill our time when we can use it in that certain way. And it's really interesting. But at the core level of it, this could be a whole webinar on its own, but the core level of it, it is not a motivation problem. It is a space problem, and it is a too many directions at once problem. And having to kind of go through that and figure out what's going on is hard work, but it's doable.
Yeah. So should we start talking about how do we fix this, or how do we slowly start? Because and I think that for anybody that's watching this, you have to know that like this isn't a process that changes overnight. Like you're not like, I'm gonna be a minimalist and then tomorrow your house is like super clean, because there's so much that's at play. There's just, you know, processes, emotions, just stuff, all of these things, all of these factors come into play, and it might be different for everybody, right? Somebody might feel like they're a hoarder and they really need to get rid of stuff, and that could be the big pain point. Or, you know, somebody who's more like me, we're like, your brain's running 100 miles a minute and you're like, I have to do all these things and I'm gonna like half finish 50,000 things, and when I'm done with the end of the day I have nothing accomplished. But trying to figure out how to slowly shift into a more minimalistic attitude, because of the fact that when you get there, you have to kind of like negotiate and set certain boundaries and rules, right? I think that that's the big piece about this, is that if you want to be more minimalist in whatever way that is for you, you have to start creating different processes that don't allow you to, you know, hoard items or run 50 million miles a minute and all of that, right? Would you guys all agree about that? So I'm sure that we all have different tools and they probably all overlap. And maybe we'll start with Anthony, just because you're our guest of honor on this webinar. But if you were gonna walk somebody through the process to kind of transition to a more minimalist mindset, but something that is a little bit more sustainable, what would you say is like a good first step?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that this is not an overnight thing. There's this whole idea of equal that I talk about called like equal and opposite reaction. So the harder you work out after not working out for a long time, you're going to be really sore and you're not going to want to do it again. Same thing with tiny habits, same thing with a lifestyle change, like looking at minimalism and applying it. It is going to be, you work out a little bit, you feel pretty good, do it again. You don't want to do this huge pass. So that's like the first thing, is starting small. Even though if it feels silly, you're probably tackling it right. Gary was talking about tacking on 2 push-ups every time X happens, whatever happens you want to tag it onto, you're going to end up doing 20 push-ups, 40 push-ups in a day. It's just a little bit at a time and working up to that point. So that's the most important thing, first of all. Let's see. The second thing is the concept of juggling, just to kind of wrap an idea around all of this stuff, the clown car, etc. Productivity in life is how much time you're effectively juggling. You can learn how to juggle 3 balls at a time, and most people, after some practice and some training, can get there where they can pretty consistently juggle 3 balls. Now, if productivity and getting the things done that are important to you is juggling, you have 3, and how long you could do that all day versus say 10. So how long each time do you think you could throw 10 balls in the air and keep the juggling going? Like, not for me, not at all. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like you're doing more, like, oh, well, I have 10 that's so much more juggling. But when it comes to the time on task and the actual quality of the juggling and the actual amount you're doing, 3 is going to win every single time, unless you're an incredible juggler, and even the best can't keep that up for too long, right? You're going to drop. So thinking through things with that analogy, it feels bad to like go step by step with this stuff. It doesn't feel, you're like, am I actually doing anything? I just got rid of one thing today, but look at all this stuff. I'm never going to get through it. Well, a year from now is going to come whether you get rid of one thing a day or not. So you might as well show up a year from now and have 365 less things in your house that you don't need. It's taking this approach to the lifestyle shift. The slower you move into it, but more consistently, the stronger it's going to be, the longer it's going to last, and the more it becomes a mentality versus a thing you did one day. So that's like the big shift mentality wise, and make it a game. So starting out, like little things like the Mins game that I mentioned, where it's a ramp up where you're actually building that decision muscle. You get rid of one thing, get rid of two things. They can be physical, they can be digital, clearing out emails, whatever it is, and letting that muscle build. Like those are that high level. I have basically like a year of content on this, so there's so much stuff. But at a high level, those are the tips I would say that can really help you just start getting into this and making decisions about it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And if I can tack on to what Anthony said, because I echo that 110%. And I, even though like I still get some internal resistance on, the whole starting small and whatnot, even though I know the science behind it. And that, for you watching, you might be coming from the same thing of like feeling like it's all or nothing, or you got to go big or go home, all those things that, are cliche that we hear. But the cool thing about doing the approach that Anthony mentioned is that there is a lot of identity tied around this. And I'll share a quick story is, so our son, Garrett, is 3, and we had been collecting all of his stuff, for various reasons. One, it's like, all right, if we have another child, like we have this, and then sometimes it's sentimental and stuff like this. And then before you know it, you're like, wow, we have a lot of stuff and we don't want to get rid of it. And then you think of like, there's a lot of sentimental value and stuff like that. And like, that's like with anything. And it's hard to just go and say, all right, I'm going cold turkey. I'm going to be this minimalist. I'm going to declutter everything. And you're right, because like, your brain wants to either go towards things that are pleasurable or away from pain. So if you like all of a sudden like want to go hardcore, it's more of like a physical thing. You're gonna like, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna be hard to make all these decisions. And then when you think about like, oh, I got to do more of this mentalism stuff. I said mentalism. No, well, it is mental, but I meant minimalist stuff. You're not going to want to do it, and it's going to be more of a struggle. But if you start tiny, and this is where the science come in, you hack your brain. It's like, oh, it's easy. Oh, I did one thing. And then you start to get that dopamine hit of like, wow, I did one thing. And it's going to make you want to do it again. But one of the cool things that happens when you do it on a small scale is that you start to look back at, and this happens unconsciously, of like your actions, and your identity is like, oh, I'm someone who actually gets rid of stuff. Oh, I must be a minimalist. And then it just becomes part of what you do, because you slowly did it over time. So you're slowly shifting your identity through these tiny habits, these tiny actions. And before you know it, it just becomes a natural thing. Like you want to do it. And then it's also like compound interest, where over time, you're right, like that time's going to pass regardless. So someone that does little by little, when you look back, you're like, wow, I did a lot, compared to someone who's like, I did a lot. Oh, that was a lot. And then you like fall off the wagon and you just don't do it. And you're not changing your mindset. And then a year later, you're still someone who wants to do this, but yet you're having a challenge. So I'm just going to stop there. Apryl.
I love that. I'm gonna tack on to this. I think that in terms of making those shifts, I definitely think that doing them slowly and doing them small is important. But I also know that sometimes you might be juggling 10 things to start, and those 10 things might feel like they're all mandatory, especially when you have kids. So it's like, for me, ever since I've had kids, I'm never just planning for myself anymore. I'm planning for myself and my kids, and I'm coordinating with my husband. So there's a lot more juggling that needs to happen. So the bare minimum of what I can do is the baseline is just higher than somebody who might be single or somebody that doesn't have kids. So if you're feeling that, I think what I always suggest for anybody who's trying to, live more intentionally, live more productively, because that's, where my brain lives all day and all night. I think, the biggest thing that you can start with is to just get it all out of your brain, because a lot of the time you're like, oh my god, I have so much to do. But if you were asked on the moment like what you needed to do, you probably couldn't list it off because you just don't have it organized. And so I always like start anybody who I'm kind of like working through these types of issues with some just sort of brain dump, and not something that you need to organize, but just to have a list so that you can kind of like vent and get it off your shoulders, so that we can kind of see how much needs to be cleaned up and where areas need to be more minimalistic. And then I'll just take a strategy of like, you pick the thing that is most time sensitive or the thing that's annoying you the most, and start with that process. And you either do something where you either focus on that one thing and kind of let everything fall apart, or just like let everything survive in the meantime, and get some sort of process and like dig deep on that one thing, and create a process that then you have little bits and pieces, that you can then create something sustainable. Or you go and say, okay, here is the baseline, I need to solidify the baseline, and then I can start introducing some of these projects. So one of the things that I tend to do is that I've got a lot of processes that are running. I have this actually have a checklist that says like what my daily like habits are that I want to do, like taking my pills, flossing my teeth, like things that are like the bare minimum of like what would be a successful day for me. And I'll go through that process of checking that off. But then I start taking some of these things that feel like they're overwhelming or they're cluttered or a mess, and I will spend time slowly cleaning them up, or having a process that then I can get to, how much would I want to spend time on email every day? Maybe half an hour. Okay, so I need to be able to create a process that tackles this huge messy project, but over a long span of time, so that when it stabilizes, it just becomes the same daily thing. And then just slowly adding on projects. And a lot of you can't do a lot of big projects all at once, right? You just have to pick no more than one, and then figure out how to juggle all the smaller things. Or if you're introducing, you have like little baseline things, and you're doing little bits and pieces, just make sure you're doing a little bit of all of those things every day. But if you're going to have to do a big project, you might need to set aside like chunks of time, but also knowing at the very end what that sustainable like time commitment would be moving forward in terms of a habitual check-in or whatnot. The only other thing that I would also say is that, and we do this in the ASC all the time, which is we look at, we create annual plans. And a lot of times, that's like the process that I just kind of described, where you're kind of brain dumping and you're then slowly organizing and figuring out how you're going to tackle these bigger projects while letting everything else just kind of sustain. And so if you can get into that process, we do our annual planning every October, so that we have a few months towards the end of the year to kind of clean up and then kick it off in January. But then we already know what our projects are, so we're kind of putting like a bookmark on the projects that we want to work on, and then we have a whole year to work on them. And so everything doesn't seem daunting. The big challenge will be, you're going to come up with unexpected things like COVID, or you're going to work on a project and then find a new opportunity. There's going to be things that are unexpected that you have to be able to juggle around, and then be able to make the decision on what takes priority, and you have to consciously choose that. So you create this plan, but it has to be flexible. And so if you create that structure year over year, then you'll be able to look back and see that you're actually accomplishing more, because your planning is you're kind of planning like a few big, massive things for a long period of time, and working towards working on those things. Just like if you're working in corporate and you have your annual review, right, they talk about the things that you want to work on, and you're trying to make little goals to make sure that you're demonstrating those skills or whatnot. So it's kind of creating some sort of plan for yourself so that you have a roadmap, rather than like allowing yourself to be distracted by this, that, or the other. So that's my, we can go into that in future months, but that's just kind of getting yourself into a mindset where you create some sort of cyclical habit of planning and then working on projects and then juggling all the rest of the stuff. So that's what I've got to say. Any other things to add on different tools that we haven't shared so far?
That's a lot of great perspective from different places, and yeah,
yeah.
What is go ahead, Gary, were you gonna say something?
Okay.
And then I forgot what I was gonna say. I always do that, sorry.
It's all good.
The last thing, and I know that we have like 10 minutes left, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about just the emotional aspect, because I think one of the things that Anthony, you talked about at the beginning was like letting go. And sometimes it's very hard to shift to that minimalist attitude. Yes, we've kind of talked about strategies of things that we can do, but like, how do you grapple? And we could probably talk about this for another hour, but if we had to summarize, because that's the piece that I think that we haven't discussed yet, there's that emotional side of letting go. Sometimes letting go of stuff is hard, even though you probably need to, or making certain choices to not jump in on this awesome idea that you had when it's like really, really filling your cup right now. And that can bring its own challenges to this process. And so what are some ways to kind of think about how to navigate those emotions, either fear of letting things go, or or could also be fear of missing out in some cases?
Yeah, Anthony, I'd love for you to start, one, because you've been doing this for a hot minute, and to just take us, what was that emotion, like, what emotions were coming up for you when you first started? Like, did you just jump in, head or feet first and be like, yeah, I'm doing this? Or were there, as you got to certain areas, were there some things where it was a little bit more challenging?
Oh, it was definitely challenging. I mean, there are times that were more exciting because you see the bags going out. It's very fulfilling. And, there are aspects around this that sometimes require therapy to get through. Like really, because like, let's be real. Like, this is not easy work a lot of the time, and there tends to be a lot of things going on from our past, from whatever parts of our lives that we're holding on to for some reason or another, and that's deep work. But for me, my personal experience with this, some of the hardest things were like books, and it's this thing that I call the false first step. It happens with purchases. For me, it was like books. I would buy books because I wanted to do that thing. I wanted to learn that language. I wanted to, commit, right? Like, buy the thing. And then I would get it. I'd like be really excited because you get it like a present to yourself, and you get to open it. And then you'd read it a little bit, and because it sort of felt like I had taken a step toward that thing that I wanted, then the energy would be kind of sucked out of the desire. And so I had, a bookshelf, just piles of books that were in like new condition, that were full of dreams and hopes and things that I was holding on to about who I wanted to be. Now, that's not going to be easy to look at that book and go, well, didn't do that, and it's a brand new book still, so it's like your sort of thing. But I didn't start reading more until I got rid of that debt, like not the monetary debt, but the identity debt. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. So yeah.
Yeah. because there was so much guilt around like all these unread books and stuff, and it wasn't until that I figured out how to read more, it was like, I have to sell these books, I have to give them away, even though they're lost dreams, right? The language, you want to be an interesting person, you want to learn these things, or you want to be able to speak Mandarin or whatever it is.
Yes.
And so you buy the thing, and letting go of that is hard because it's letting go of a piece of yourself that you wanted to be someone that you something you aspired towards. And so that was the hard part, and we do that with all kinds of things, not just books. So yeah, for me that was the one.
So how did you get past it?
The gamification of getting rid of things built momentum around this, for sure. I didn't start with that. You don't want to start with the hard stuff. You want to start with paper clips. Like, you want to start with the junk drawer, where it's just like
the junk email.
Yeah, the junk emails. You don't want to start because it's a matter of momentum. Like, it's a matter of building the muscle. You don't want to do the full 8-hour workout on your first time to the gym.
Yeah.
You want to go, oh, this place is pretty cool. There's a treadmill, walk a little bit. Cool, I bet I can do that again tomorrow. You know, come back, check out another thing. And that's the same thing. And so, yeah, it was a buildup, but it is still hard. And I wrote about it. That's the other way. I wrote about it, and I was sharing the journey on the blog, so it helped.
Absolutely. I think too, if you are somebody who is feeling like you're struggling with letting go and having, I don't know why I keep on like bringing up ASC stuff, but like having either a partner who is struggling with the same thing, or somebody who is on the other side of it and has accomplished that thing. So, you know, if you are somebody who is a hoarder and you're like, I, you know, really want to get rid of this stuff, but, you know, all of this stuff has sentimental value to me and I can't decide which way, to have somebody who will kind of hold your hand through it and is, you know, worth so much, or to even have somebody who has had to go through that journey already and act as some sort of mentor to you know, ask you the questions that you can't ask yourself because you're too far in your box hiding with all of your stuff and not wanting to let go, and to just give you either the tough love or the gentle nudging that you need to get through it, right? Because you know, you will make whatever justifications to keep your stuff if that is a problem for you to let go. And if you don't let go, then it's just a problem that perpetuates longer, right? So, you know, making sure that there's somebody outside of you that can really be like, you really do need that? You know, is that really what you want to do? Is that the decision that you want to make? I think that could also be very helpful in terms of navigating the emotions of it, because then you have to speak to somebody else, whereas you can kind of hide in your hole and make excuses on, you know, why and justifications on why you need to keep something the way that it is, even though it doesn't seem to be serving you, right?
100%. And like, that's the immense value of your community, like the work that the two of you are doing and all the perspective you have is like, you're offering that to your community, right? Like the outside perspective, the expertise that allows people to see this. And I've seen the amazing stuff that you all are creating consistently in the community. And so it's really cool that people have access to that. I mean, it's amazing to see and obviously very, very helpful. So, yeah.
Thank you. And another thing I'd like to add, especially when, you know, the emotions get into it of what you're leaving behind. It's a really great reframe of, and that's why I like Anthony's approach to intentional living, is what are the things that you're making space for? Because a lot of times we have a hard time letting go of stuff for whatever reason. But it does help, and it gives you that sense of hope of like, you know what, by not having to do X, Y, and Z, it is giving me the space to do this. And I'm the type of person that loves to say yes to a lot of things. And, you know, and in improv, like when you first start doing improv, they like say yes, say yes, say yes. And then after a while, I realized I was saying yes to a whole bunch of stuff. And then I was like, oh, I have to say no. And it's like, oh, but, you know, my whole identity is wrapped around saying yes. And, you know, improvisers say yes, they don't say no. And then the reframe of, you know what, when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something that matters or something that, you know, is important. And the whole thing about minimalism is the attention, that you're placing on something. And when something, isn't important, and things change over time. Like maybe at one point, like you got all these things because it made sense, but now your priorities change. That really helps put things in perspective of, and I love what Anthony mentioned before, like, hey, look, you can love books, because that's something. My sister was watching the Marie Kondo thing and she was getting mad. She was like, I was like, what's up? And she's like, I'm not getting rid of my books. I'm like, no one said you had to. If they still bring you an immense amount of value and you want to keep them, that's great. That is, you're making an intentional choice to do that. But what are the things that don't, bring you joy or doesn't bring value to your life? Let go of that so you can have space for more books.
Yes.
For sure.
All right, well, I think we're coming up on the end here, so I think that I'd like to just leave everybody with one lasting thought. But before that, Anthony, obviously you are a member of the ASC, so people can reach out to you in there as much as you can. And he's got his own community that he leads. You want to tell us a little bit about, like,
yeah,
where
please,
people can find you and all the amazing resources that you have?
I'd love to. Thanks so much. And yeah, absolutely. Please do message me in the ASC community, and I'd love to chat, follow up on any of these things there. In terms of my stuff, breakthetwitch.com, and we have a community of our own, actually, which is essentially, this is the member community where it's focused on kind of this niche, this area that we've been talking about, looking at minimalism, looking at habit change, and those sorts of things with that particular focus. And that's at breakthetwitch.com/community. We have a year of audio courses and all kinds of stuff and content. And then we do live focus sessions every day with the community itself, where we work together for 90 minutes during scheduled sessions on a Zoom call, much like this, with our mics muted, so it's silent. But that's been a lot of fun, and we do all kinds of stuff like that. So it's there's a lot more on the website and information there, but appreciate checking it out.
Love it. All right,
Awesome.
so let's leave everybody with one last thing, like takeaway. If there's one thing that we've talked about in the last hour that we want to make sure that people remember, what is that? And Gary, you start, then we'll have Anthony round up the end, and I'll be second.
Cool. The one thing that I would say is make room for celebration. That is important. A lot of times we overlook that. Like, oh my God, especially if we're starting small. We're like, it doesn't seem significant. But if you want to turn this into who you are, you need to get that dopamine going. So celebrate everything.
I love that. My tip for all of you guys in terms of minimalism is to give yourself permission to slow down. I think this process will require some slowing down, and it's an emotional thing for somebody like me who loves to like do a ton of things and still probably does so much more than an average person. But the feeling of slowing down feels like, you're failing or something, and it's not that way. You are saying yes to a better, more fulfilling, more intentional life, and the slowing down is part of that. I mean, we don't want to have to move at lightning speed if we don't have to, right? Like, we all would love to lay on a beach and just chill. So why not do that every day and, say no to the things that are going to take us out of that? So that's my takeaway. And Anthony?
Yeah, I would tag on to that, Apryl, as well, and say that the perspective around this that's been really helpful for me is the goal isn't to be a minimalist 6 months from now, or be a minimalist next week, or be a minimalist at all. It's really about changing the things day to day and keeping them that way. I hit it with my elbow, which is impressive. So it's really about making changes that stick, and about having these lifestyle changes and this perspective stay with you a year from now, 5 years from now. And in that way, it's very much like fitness. You can work out really hard for 6 months and it will be beneficial, but a year from now, it will not be nearly as beneficial if you just work out way more chill, but keep doing it for a year. So with that perspective, it's about the actions and the consistency with it. when you get to where you want to be, there are actions that come with maintaining it that are equal. So it's more of just like building this practice of choosing, building this practice, and just digging in that way, instead of it having be this big thing you need to do now, or else something won't be as good as it could be. And implementing that is the way to do it that works and sticks.
Love it.
Cool.
All right. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for being our guest in this month's themed webinar of minimalism. And for those of you who are watching this outside of the ASC, if you're interested in learning more about us and our community, just go to accountabilitysuccesscircle.com. Anthony's website is breakthetwitch.com. And if you have any other questions, for those of you who are in the ASC and watching this either on replay or we're watching it live, we've had a few people watching it live with us, so thank you.
Yes.
But we want to just make sure that if you have any questions, obviously you can message all three of us privately if you'd rather not the whole community to see, or you can comment on the post that will be shared in the next day or two. So thank you so much, and we'll see you guys later.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Bye.